topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Bill Martinez, and I've got a real treat for you. America's #1 syndicated columnist, Cal Thomas, is with us to talk about his new book, A Watchman in the Night, what I've seen in over 50 years of reporting on America. He writes in his preface, "Ask me a question and I'll give you an answer. This is what I've done and am continuing to do as I seek to serve God first and then my country." The award-winning journalist has spent over 50 years speaking with leaders and everyday people and reporting on world events through his syndicated column. Welcome, Cal Thomas. Cal, good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you for having me.
Hey, I am so excited for this opportunity. I know I had you on my radio show before, but I thought this would be a special time. This would give us a little bit more time to talk about your storied career of 50 years.
Well, thank you. The more I think about it, the more I realize how fast time goes by.
Right. But what a journey for you. I mean, let's go back day one. How did it start for you, Cal?
Well, I started in radio when I was 16 years old, about 2 weeks after my voice changed, Bill. And it happened this way. A local disc jockey came out to the teen club that I was president of and said he was going to have a little class for people who are interested in talking on the radio. I'd never heard that before. So I said, well, that sounds kind of interesting. And one thing led to another. And then I was invited out to the radio station to do some high school reports. And then the boss of the station said, "Hey, kid, you sound pretty good. How'd you like to have your own show?" So I did that for a year or so. And then I joined NBC News as a copy boy in Washington. Met some tremendous journalists who were major influences in my life. And depending on your view of the media, worked my way up or down from there.
Well, I've had 50 years of media experience, and we always look at it as going up. It's been, and your story parallels mine a little bit, Cal. I was a freshman class president in college. We started a campus radio station, and that's how I got pulled into it. Originally, I was heading to Fresno State. I was going to play baseball and live happily ever after with my 2.3 kids. And radio and the media got a hold of me. And so here I am all these years later, having fun and a blessed opportunity to talk to you.
Well, as you know, Bill, this is probably the only profession where you can meet so many people from different backgrounds, from heads of state to show business people to average folks to baseball players. It's really great. And I've enjoyed it immensely. People say, "When are you going to retire?" I say, "To what? I don't play golf. I love what I do. So why should I retire?"
Yeah, I'm with you. And it's funny, at our age, everybody asks us that same question, and I go, "No, I won't," because even my doctor told me, he said, "Bill, your constitution is so strong that you'll probably die. And then 3 years later, you'll get the memo."
Yeah, you'll get your Declaration of Independence.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, your first job at the radio station, was it a music station or were you doing news?
Oh, yes. Back then it was all AM and all music. Matter of fact, this is a great story. My wife, who was a high school classmate at the time, worked for the same station I did, but she was squiring around celebrities. She was a model, beautiful woman, still is. And I was on the air, and we both went our separate ways. And 50 years later, I was able to marry the prettiest girl in high school.
Oh, well, what? You 50 years later? I mean,
we both had long-term spouses. They both passed away within a few weeks of each other, and we reconnected, and it was like magic. I told the Lord I didn't want to be alone the rest of my life, and but if he was going to send me somebody, number one, she had to be a believer.
Yes.
And like Solomon, who asked for wisdom and not for the death of his enemies or great wealth. Right. God gave him what he asked for and a whole lot more too. So I really grabbed the gold ring with this one.
Well, lucky you. Well, congratulations. So, how much fun is that? So,
It's a lot of fun,
yeah,
especially when you don't have kids to worry about.
exactly. Well, but you got grandkids, I'm sure,
Oh
right?
yeah, I've got
Yeah.
grandkids, great grandchildren. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you go to DC. You're working your way up and working around noted professionals. Drop some names for us.
Well, I think probably the most influential of them all was the late David Brinkley, who
Mhm.
was part of a team, the Huntley Brinkley Report on NBC. It was extremely popular for years. But I had a great job. I got to meet all these guys. I go out and some stories cover with them that they covered, and most importantly, I was in charge of filing their scripts. So that became my writing class. I saw how they would take the Associated Press or United Press wires, which
Mhm.
for newspapers, and convert them into broadcast style. I learned very early that older people love to give advice. And so I picked their brain and experience, and they were happy to pour their lives into me. Now I'm an older person and I'm trying to do it with younger people, just like that.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works, right?
Mhm.
We have stories. We like to share stories, and here you are working with the likes of Huntley Brinkley. And what was probably the single most important thing that you learned from him?
Oh, wow. Well, gee, that's hard to say. Just being around him was a learning experience by osmosis. But
Mm.
there were other great ones too. For example, Sander Van Oker, who covered the Kennedy
Oh,
White House,
right.
took me over there one day, saw my first president live,
Mm.
seen everyone or met everyone since. And I really got hooked on the experience. It's just amazing. Again, what other profession could you be in that allows you to meet so many great people? But these were wonderful examples. These were all writers. They came from newspapers or wire services. They knew how to write. They wrote their own stuff, unlike a lot of today. And
Mhm.
they were all real journalists. They
Right.
weren't advocates for a political party or persuasion. I'm sure most were Democrats. But I think Brinkley had the greatest line I've ever heard. He said, when it comes to journalism, he said, it's impossible to be objective, so we must try to be fair.
Wow.
Oh, if we only had that standard today.
Yeah, without a doubt. And speaking of journalism, I was a broadcast journalism major, and and I really believed in the First Amendment and the duty that the First Amendment puts upon the media to tell the whole truth, from an objective viewpoint, to advance the intellect of we the people. And sadly, that seems to be missing today.
That's very true, Bill. And as a friend of mine says, the even greater power of the media is the power to ignore the
Mm,
stories they don't cover,
right.
not to mention the slant they put on the ones they do cover.
Mhm.
We've seen this now in the Middle East. The first few days, the media were mostly almost 100% on the side of Israel as the victim. But after 4 or 5 days, all of a sudden things started getting turned around. And
Mhm.
it's those poor victims in Gaza. And look what Israel has done. And isn't that terrible? And then you have all of these universities. I mean, a lot of people didn't know what was going on at our universities like Harvard and many others. Huge numbers of anti Semitic rants and chants, anti
Exactly.
Zionists, do away with free Palestine, do away with the Jews, do away with Israel. And I think this has unmasked a lot of what academia is doing and brainwashing young people. The amazing thing to me is that so many parents pay for this sort of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, you think about the millions upon millions of dollars that you invest to have your children indoctrinated and not educated. It is a sad commentary on academia today. The model in which they're following is consistent, Cal, as you recall. In World War II, it was the media of record that was backing Adolf Hitler. And so it's not a big surprise here that we find ourselves today. But I think that God has done us a favor, whether it's with COVID or whether with this incident in Israel with Hamas, is that He's taking the shield off our eyes to see the truth.
That's very true, Bill. And the thing that amazes me the most is that we have a choice in these things.
Mhm.
It's not like Russia or China, which has only one point of view and one school system. Why would you willingly send your children into the enemy's camp where you get drag queen story time in kindergarten, critical race theory. America's a terrible nation. We don't send our troops to China and Russia to be trained, or Iran. We train them here with our own values and our own weapon systems and our own strategy. But so many conservative and Christian parents willingly send their kids into these indoctrination centers known as public schools, and then off to universities where they come back as moral, spiritual, and intellectual zombies, not believing what their parents believed when they sent them to these places. But you're right, COVID and some of these other things have increased private schools and homeschooling. There's now school choice in 37 states. Louisiana is about to become number 38. And it's taken away the argument, gee, I can't afford it. Well, you can't afford not to do it now.
Exactly. Well, maybe critical, not critical theory, but critical thought.
Race theory,
Forget about race theory, but critical thought. That's what needs to be exercised once again. It's okay to ask questions. Like you say in your preface, people, ask questions. You found answers. You gave them answers. We need to have this free exchange, because this is when America and a democratic republic really exercises its full potential, don't you think?
Yes. Well, as I've been writing my column for almost 40 years now, and as people will see in this book, I start with the premise that objective truth is knowable. For me, it begins with the scripture.
Yes.
God is all-knowing. God knows everything about the world that he created and about the people he created. He has not lost control of things, even though it may seem so at the time. So I start with a standard of truth and fiction. I remember I used to appear a lot on the old Phil Donahue show on television. Right. And Phil would ask me these questions like, well, now, do you really believe this or that or whatever? I said, well, Phil, I didn't make the rules. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the ones who did.
That's right. Exactly. Well, this is the thing, it's like absolute truth is as clear as the law of gravity. But yet you have people that still want to defy gravity until they get tired of, bruising and breaking up their legs enough. So everything I look at, like you do, from a biblical worldview, God created, says, in the Bible, in the beginning, God, not in the beginning, Joe Biden or Bill Clinton or anybody else. God himself was the one, and he put everything into motion. He established the guardrails, the infrastructure for righteousness, that if we do those things, then we get the proper outcome, right?
Exactly right. And I remember something the late Catholic Bishop Fulton Sheen said. He asked a question, how do you define a football field? By its boundaries.
Yes.
And in a talk he gave once, he made the case, and it was brilliant, that the reason we're in so much trouble financially, socially, economically, and every other area is that we've exceeded the boundaries Scripture set for our benefit, and the Constitution sets for our benefit. The whole purpose of the Constitution is to promote the general welfare, not everybody's welfare, because there are competing interests. You have to look at the general welfare. So what has benefited the general welfare in the past? Up until the early 20th century, we used to have a supplemental book in a lot of schools called the McGuffey Readers.
Yes, exactly.
Patriotism, love and respect for your parents, love for God, and included scripture verses. Now, who took a poll and found out that a majority of Americans think that those were bad values to teach young people? Nobody I know of.
Yes.
The secular humanist progressives have moved in and ripped out all of that stuff. And how do you like what we're getting? So I try not to just argue my viewpoint. I ask people to consider what the other viewpoint has produced.
Exactly.
Look at the murders in our cities, the open border, the $33 trillion in debt, the loss of a shared moral value system, huge numbers of young people who have no faith anymore. This is what the secular progressives have given us. So I don't defend my values. Mine and yours worked out pretty well. I attack the other values and try to hold them accountable.
Yeah, the other opportunity for today's America, Cal, we've been saying on our show, is that you need to study, kind of like a bank teller, how they figure out the difference between counterfeit and the real. They don't study the counterfeit, they study the real. Exactly. And that's, we need to bring back our focus to the legitimate, so that when these things raise their heads, like evil raises its head, it's inarguable. I mean, why are we having a long discussion when you go and you decapitate 40 kids and you conduct mass murder? That is evil. I think that's without debate.
Well, history is full of examples of what happens when you deny such things.
Mhm.
You'll remember Neville Chamberlain thought he could
Yes.
just give Hitler Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland, and he wouldn't start World War II. When you give in to that kind of mentality, you simply invite more evil. And when you give in to all of this nonsense about genders, and I'm reading this book right now, The Babylon Bee Guide to Gender.
Yeah, I got they sent me. I love that too. That's good.
Hilarious.
Right.
Except so much of it is true.
Yes.
I mean, you have 57 different gender identifications on Facebook. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Come on.
Well,
But
in
this
some
is
of the
what happens
California,
this is
some of
what
the
happens
California
when-
universities, they're up to 90, Cal.
Oh, well, I'm a little behind. G.K. Chesterton said that the danger when men stop believing in God is not that they'll believe in nothing, but that they'll believe in anything. Or as
Exactly.
the Apostle Paul wrote, in the end, people will believe whatever their itching ears want to hear. And there's so many churches that are joining in with this. I remember the late columnist Joe Sobran, who happened to be Roman Catholic, and he said, I'd rather belong to a church that's 500 years behind the times and sublimely indifferent to change than I would to a church that's 5 minutes behind the times, huffing and puffing to catch up.
Exactly. Well said. Cal Thomas is with us, the author of the new book, A Watchman in the Night, What I've Seen Over 50 Years Reporting on America. He is America's #1 syndicated columnist. Cal, the Bible is clear, and we've been hinting on this, is that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And also, I think that it's interesting because here man has all their postulations and theories, and the Bible also tells us that at that time when God hears it, he laughs. I imagine he's having a good belly chuckle time and again these days.
Well, the old definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different outcomes.
Yes.
We have a history. We didn't just crawl out of a cave. We don't have to invent the wheel or discover fire. We don't live in the past. One of Ronald Reagan's great qualities was he was always talking about the future. Even Bill Clinton in 1992 had a campaign song by Fleetwood Mac called Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow. Right. So we're not the first humans to walk the earth. We can learn from the past. We know in our personal lives what happens when we pile on too much debt. We have to cut our spending. Some of us may have to cut our lifestyles a little bit to get back in financial order. But when the government is spending like there's no tomorrow, there are three things now that are affecting the future of America, in my view, and I've written about it over and over again. Number one is massive national debt. Ours is $33 trillion.
And counting.
Yep. Number two, an open border. No nation can control itself and have a nation if it doesn't control its borders. And then number three, a loss of a shared moral value system.
Amen.
Any one of those has caused the collapse of nations in the past, and we're confronting all three at the same time. What makes us think we can avoid the judgment of history, much less the judgment of God?
Well, you're exactly right, Cal. It's staring us in the face. The open border issue, especially. I mean, look what's happened here in America. We are importing hate into this country.
And
we're really, I mean, you think about it, I look at the campus scenes that are going on. We have America's children out there that have been indoctrinated. That's one thing. But when you have kids that have been imported, from the Middle East that have been trained from day one to hate, how do you redeem them?
Well, the gospel is the best redemption of all, but you have to find them.
Right.
Border Patrol has thousands of gutaways, as they call them. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they've gone. Now, Iran has bragged in the past and recently that they've smuggled agents into the United States, just waiting for a cue to wreak havoc on this country again and produce another 9/11 type terrorist attack. Why wouldn't we believe them?
Exactly.
I mean, and then to hear from people like Secretary Mayorkas, the Homeland Secretary, that the border is secure. Are you going to believe him or your lying eyes? I mean, it's not secure in any way. We need to finish the wall, and we need to deport all of these people who came here illegally. There's a legal way to come to America to prove that you are a victim and that you're a legitimate asylum seeker. But these people have gotten the word, and they're coming from 50 different countries around the world, not just Spanish-speaking countries that come to America, you get free stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Over 100,000 Americans have died from fentanyl poisoning, and the administration is doing nothing about it. It's a disgrace.
Yeah, 162 countries have representatives who have come illegally into our nation, Cal. This is what we're dealing with, and they're not vetted. We know that most of them are being controlled, and they're beholden to the cartel. The cartel network, the tentacles go well into this country. We have no idea. I mean, you talk about fentanyl, another form of bioweaponry brought to you by the Chinese. Oh, yeah, by the way. Yep. And then we've got the sex trafficking issue that's going on and on and on. Again, this is adding to the moral decadence of our country, isn't it?
It's, it's adding to it, but it's also a reflection of it. When you look at over 60 million abortions, when you look at same-sex marriage, transgenderism, and all of these other things, they are a reflection, not necessarily a cause. When you forget God, when you ignore his principles, when he is not supreme and the individual becomes supreme, then anything is not only possible, anything is probable.
Right. And this is where America is today, sadly. But to your point, you see, you read the book of Revelations and you see Jesus's description of the churches. And, this is an indictment upon the churches, and today's church needs to look at to see where are you in those churches amongst the lampstands that Jesus has identified and describing.
Well, look at those so-called mainline churches. They've lost huge numbers of people because they are aligning themselves with the world's agenda. Yes. You've had Black Lives Matter flags outside on the marquees of some of these churches. Then you've had the gay flag, the tricolor flag out there as well. All are welcome. Then people performing gay marriages. Why bother to go to a church like that?
Exactly.
There's nothing uplifting. There's nothing about conversion. There's nothing about the gospel. There's nothing about Jesus. There's just nothing. You might as well stay home in bed on Sunday morning. You'd be better off.
And that's what they've been doing. That's what they've chosen to do because they've abandoned their brand. A big part of my life, Cal's been in marketing, and I honor an organization's brand. That is absolutely precious. And to see what the church has done in abandoning its brand, because when you do, you let loose of your identity in the community, your force for good in the community, and this is what's happening. To your point.
Well, that's right. And the growing churches, the ones with the most members, are the ones that faithfully preach the gospel every week. That's what I hear at my church every week. I told the pastor, if you ever get off that, I'm out of here. I'm not staying an extra day. Don't preach on politics. Lift up the kingdom of God, which is the one Jesus said is the only kingdom. His is not passing away. This kingdom here. When King David was king over Israel, he had the greatest line, I think, on this subject I've ever heard. He said, put not your trust in princes and kings or in mortal flesh that cannot save. Because in time they all pass away, turn to dust and amount to nothing. So one of Satan's great distractions, I've learned, is to get you to focus on other things, focus on what he's doing and not the Lord himself. He said, if I be lifted up, I'll draw men to me. We're lifting up a whole lot of other stuff, and that's why more people are not being drawn to him.
Well, you're exactly right. Whether we're talking about governments, and you were mentioning earlier, and the thought came to mind, I think one of the most effective things that John F. Kennedy gave to the country was a sense of vision, and where he cast a vision out, and what were he able to do because of the vision that he put forward?
Well, that's right. I think he inspired people, and inspiration followed by motivation, followed by perspiration, I learned, improves any life. But now we are into envy, greed, and entitlement. Corporations are evil. People aren't paying their fair share in taxes. Those evil Republicans are going to take away your Social Security. We've heard this argument for 50 years. It's all baloney. But the Republicans have never been able to really address that and to conquer it because most of the media is on the side of the liberals and the Democrats and the progressives.
Exactly.
I think, Ronald Reagan used to say the only proof of eternal life in Washington is a government program. A great line. It's true. It's easier to kill a vampire than a government program.
Well, yeah, because look at all the waste. I mean, when Donald Trump was in office, he identified duplication of 17. I think it was at least 17 agencies, and oh my goodness, you thought he had moved their cheese. They went into a catatonic fit and threw themselves into a ball on the floor, right?
Well, government is their God. It's
Yeah.
a perversion of the 23rd Psalm. The government is my keeper, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of poverty, the Health and Human Services Department will be there comforting me with food stamps and relief.
Yeah. Well, Cal, getting back to your life experience, I mean, 50 years, I just love hearing your stories. And, you've mentioned Ronald Reagan, but let's go through a little bit. We just touched on JFK and your reportage of John F. Kennedy.
Well, my column hadn't started then. I was still a copy boy at NBC. But all of these things, the people I met, the people I got to see, because of my experience there, some of the congressional hearings I went to, all were part of the collective influence that turned me into a real journalist. I mean, with only one small exception, I've been in journalism all my life. I don't align myself. I don't contribute to campaigns. I'm not on any board paid positions. And so when people read my columns, they can know that this is my own opinion.
Right.
And they can either agree or disagree, but know that I'm not being paid for or influenced by anybody. Now, there are not a lot of people in this business like that anymore. You've got a lot, mostly Democrats, who are coming from political offices like George Stephanopoulos in Good Morning America, Jake Tapper at CNN, worked on the Hill, Chris Matthews, who used to be on MSNBC, was an aide to Tom Foley, the former Speaker of the House. A lot of these people came from Democrat politics and all of a sudden get stamped as journalists on their head. They're no more journalists than I am a rocket scientist.
Right, exactly.
This, I think, has contributed, among other things, to the decline in trustworthiness of the media. All the polls show that. They've shown it for years. But this is the only profession that doesn't seem to care what people think. And yet newspapers are closing, they're downsizing. USA Today has become so thin, you can now see the weather page from the front page.
Right, exactly. Well, this situation. I mean, here you've got Elon Musk, who breaks away from the social media oligarchs and says, okay, I'm going to re-embrace the First Amendment. And the rest of them are going nuts. I mean, it's tough going against the headwinds of the Beltway and what's already been established, because the realm of the coin there is a certain operation, and you must be true to it. If you're not, you're going to be rejected and spit out, right?
Well, this is the arrogance of so many of my colleagues, unfortunately. And they had a monopoly when I started out in the business: NBC, ABC, CBS, New York Times, Washington Post. And but then when the conservatives started coming along with talk radio, and Reagan got rid of the fairness doctrine, which was really not fair at all. It stifled speech rather than encouraging it. Exactly. And then you had Rush Limbaugh and so many talk show hosts and so many other outlets, the Washington Times, conservative publications. The left screamed bloody murder because they felt that their territory was being trespassed on. But they only read their own stuff. They just reinforce what they already believe. Some conservatives do that too. But in journalism, I'll tell you a story. A guy I know at the New York Times called me a year or so ago and wanted to know something. I forget what it was. And then at the end of the conversation, he said, "By the way, are you still writing your column?" And I felt like saying, "Yeah, are you? I mean, I read yours. Why don't you read mine?"
Right.
So they only read stuff that reinforces what they already think. And anybody who thinks otherwise didn't go to the right universities, is uneducated, must be a religious fanatic, a right-wing MAGA Republican, and so therefore should not be considered.
Exactly. Well, speaking of universities, what came out recently was a report that, journalists that are in the newsrooms today come from, I think, about 39 universities, almost exclusively. So they've got a stranglehold, and the doctrine is being repeated throughout these universities. So it's no wonder that these kids coming into these newsrooms have been preconditioned with a certain worldview.
Well, I remember on my old Fox show, I had Leslie Stahl on, who I've known for some time, and the debate was then, as it is occasionally, about conservatives in the news business. And I said, "No, Leslie, how many conservatives are at CBS? Well, I'm sure we have some. I said, name one. Well, it's a big salad there, so I'm sure we must have some. So after the interview, I ordered a salad bowl and sent it to her. There aren't any conservatives at any major network at a decision-making level. I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine told me she was the religion reporter for World News Tonight when Peter Jennings was the host.
Right.
So they sent her out on this story to do a story on people who were sick and believed through prayer that God had healed them. So she interviewed a bunch of people who said that they had prayed and God healed them, and she put the story together. So she sends it to New York, and the Jewish producer, just tell you that because that's what he was, calls her and said, okay, well, we got your story now. Go back and re-interview those people and see why they really think they were healed. And she said, no, you sent me out to do this, and they believe they were healed because God healed them. Right. Yeah, I heard that. But go out and go re-interview them and find. So there's this blindness, deliberate blindness in so much of the hierarchy of the mainstream media today to what real Americans experience: going to church, serving in the military, raising their kids properly. And again, it's the only profession I know of that doesn't care what a substantial number of potential viewers and readers thinks.
Yeah. Well, those are the same people that one politician wanted to put into the basket of deplorables and recently said that she thought that they were fit to be reprogrammed, needed to be sent to a camp and be re-educated, right?
That's exactly the attitude I'm talking about. You can't have a rational, reasonable discussion with people who think you're intellectually inferior, you didn't go to the right university, and most of all, the proof of your idiocy is that you vote Republican and not for them.
Well, I think your strength, as you said earlier, Cal, is that you don't have to care other than that you're serving God and you're doing, you have your own integrity and your commitment, to yourself and your family to honor yourselves. And, I think that's that's a goal for all of us to maintain so that we don't get incorrectly influenced, that we know where our identity, our true identity comes from and how we're to honor one another.
Well, that's right. I have on the back of my watch, people ask for my favorite verse. I like all of them, but the one I think that speaks to how I got my column, how the door got open for me, is 1 Samuel 2:30. He who honors me, I will honor. Yeah. And as I say in the preface to the book, A Watchman in the Night, I hope God is pleased with that because I have sought to honor him with whatever notoriety and visibility he has given me. I owe it all to him.
When did Jesus become real to you, Cal?
Well, like many people, I had parents who took me to church on Sunday, but we never read the Bible in the home. We had one, but we never to open it up. My grandfather gave me a silver dollar once if I had memorized the 23rd Psalm, and that was the last serious Bible study I ever did. Until I was on this fast track to become a network correspondent at NBC News, thinking that money and fame and things would provide satisfaction. And I had made a goal for myself at the age of 18 to be a network correspondent by the time I was 30. But God had other ideas. By the time I was 30, I got fired. And we had my wife and I at the time had a little meeting in our home, and she told me, you'll never be free of this desire to become a success until you thank God for losing your job. Now, that sounds stupid to a lot of people, but back then, my job was my God, as that was where I got my identity from.
Exactly.
And the Lord took me from that and put me in the company of some amazing people. Richard Halverson, who became my pastor and led me to Christ, pastor of Fourth Presbyterian Church in Bethesda, Maryland, later chaplain of the U.S. Senate. Ralph Neighbor, who taught me sound doctrine, pastor in Houston, where I worked for a local TV station. And most of all, Francis Schaeffer, the philosopher, theologian, who taught me how to process ideas, which through a biblical perspective, which became the foundation of all my writing. I'm not saying every column I write is biblically defensible, but I hope none of them are biblically offensible.
Exactly. No, I hear what you're saying because when I was brought into the genre, I mean, when I first started in radio, I was a juvenile, I was a disc jockey, a program director, and just having fun and working in LA radio. And kind of like you, I just did, to me, it was going to be a means to an end, not the be all and end all. But God had a different idea. And then later on, when I went back and finished my schooling, went to Bible college, and God says, well, I want you back behind the microphone. I said, you got to be kidding me. Are you real? I mean, you do realize when I was behind the microphone before, I was taking dedications. I was working with the likes of, Wolfman Jack and characters like that. Yeah, exactly.
Cousin
So, yeah. So it was quite the shock.
Well, Bill, here's the other thing. What you just said is very, very important. We have this idea that we can only serve God if we do something in a religious realm.
Yes.
Or something we call full-time Christian service. Well, every believer ought to be in full-time Christian service.
Yes.
And this is one of the problems and one of the reasons so much of the media and Hollywood and academia have become dominated by the secular progressives, because so many believers have not filled that vacuum. We've created a vacuum that the other side has been willing to rush in. So it's not all their fault. A lot of it is our wrong-headed view of what it means to fully serve God. If you've got a talent as a singer or an actor or a writer or a teacher, go serve God in these places.
Exactly.
It's just as important as being a missionary. In fact, a traditional missionary. In fact, you are a missionary. Every believer is a missionary.
Exactly.
Nick Halverson, I mentioned earlier, he used to be asked where his church was. And instead of giving an address, he'd look at his watch. He said, well, my church is in government. It's in academia. It's in whatever. So this is the real church, Christ in you. Not a building, not a denomination, but Christ in you.
Cal, when I go through the contents of your book, I mean, you must think it sometimes. I mean, did you think for a moment, gosh, you're like the Forrest Gump? I mean, because all these things that you've experienced, I mean, it's not that. I mean, not only did you write about them, but as you mentioned, what a privilege and honor to meet a cast of characters that were such a part of history.
Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
Well, there it is. Well, you've gone through, this history of this great country, great presidents, times where we have been, experiencing incredible trials. One that you addressed, definitively was, Rodney King, which was the beginning, I believe, one of the early stages of, kind of announcing to people that we had serious problems that needed to be addressed.
Well, this goes back to the 60s, of course. I was around during all the civil rights movement, the demonstrations, riots, and the rest. So that was the precursor to the rest. But what the media don't do, they love focusing on this stuff because it feeds a narrative. They don't cover successful African Americans very often. They only go after those terrible white racists who suppress Black people. That's their narrative. And when they find something like a Rodney King or a George Floyd or some of the others, and Al Sharpton rushes in, used to be Jesse Jackson, and stands before the cameras and denounces this and that. Now, when a Black person kills a white person, it's not news. When a Black person kills another Black person, it's not news. Look at Chicago. Black people are killing each other every night of the week in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in New York, in all our major cities, all run by liberal Democrats, of course. Does the media ever make that point? No. Do they ever cover much of that? No. They only do it on the occasion when, say, a white police officer trying to subdue, usually a Black criminal with a long rap sheet, is unfortunately killed. So it's all part of a narrative that America is a bad country. Black people are oppressed and can never make it without government. White people are racist. And if you believe there are only two genders, then you're one of many kinds of phobes.
Right. Well, the thing that's amazing is they'll force fit, some of the narrative, kind of like what they did, because this left me perplexing because I'd never heard of a white Mexican before, Cal. I had to call my mother. I go, and of course I've been accused because I'm so light complected. Because it's interesting. My mother was from Mexico, my dad from Spain, so every other child was dark light, dark light. So I got the light complexion. But I had to call my mother, and I said, the news in Florida is reporting that Zimmerman is a white Hispanic.
Well, all this identity politics that's played, we have a national motto, e pluribus unum, out of many one.
Yes.
But now we become out of one many. We're now hyphenated Americans. It used to be that people would come to America, they'd learn English, they would embrace the Constitution, they would read and study and learn our history, but they don't do that anymore. Some schools have stopped saying the Pledge of Allegiance because there's so many kids from other countries.
Right.
Well, if their country's so great, why are they here? Why are their parents here?
Exactly.
I think it's very, very discouraging. You can't have a nation that is hyphenated, and it's
we become the ununited states is what we do by the hyphenation process. And the thing is that with legal immigration, Cal, as you know, is that legal immigrants came and they loved America. Like my parents. I mean, the key, my dad, he wanted us to assimilate so much so that, we learned a little bit of Spanish. I will say a bit embarrassingly, I wish I was more fluent. Several of the kids became fluent because their jobs took them in that area. For me, being in broadcasting, I worked in English radio. But for my parents, our parents wanted us to assimilate.
Yeah, well, you mentioned about skin color a minute ago. I think somebody who's done a tremendous job contributing to the conversation about race in America is Skip Gates of Harvard. He's had this wonderful series on PBS called African American Lives, and one about Reconstruction. He's a Harvard professor, but don't hold it against him. He did this, his first show on African American Lives. He did these DNA tests on people to trace their history back to their slave ancestors. And as he said, the slave masters were pretty bad people, but they did keep good records because they thought these people were property. Right. And so he decided one day he would do a DNA test on himself. And he found that he was over 60% Irish. I said, Skip, you sure don't look Irish, but that's the point.
Right,
We're all mixed up in the grand gene pool of life.
Mm-hmm.
How you look doesn't determine who you are. Mm-hmm. My identity isn't in my race. It's not in my gender. It's in my God, who has saved me. That's where my identity is. And, Paul writes, in Christ, there is no Greek or Gentile. There's no Jew or Gentile or Greek. We're all the same. And that's the kind of attitude we should have, not only biblically, but also as an American citizen.
Well, and that's how it started with our founding fathers. When the Pilgrims first came, and our founding fathers, started with a white sheet of paper and said, hey, we're going to do something revolutionary here on many levels, including a manifesto that was going to be laid out in the Declaration of Independence backed up by the U.S. Constitution, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's something else that isn't taught very much anymore. You ask people to name the First Amendment or any one of the first 10 amendments. They're as unlikely to be able to do that as they could name any of the 10 commandments. Right. We just don't teach those kinds of things. And what kind of a degree, so many people, I just was out in Los Angeles. I wrote a column about their public schools there. California is the #1 state for illiteracy in this country.
Wow.
Imagine illiteracy. And how does that happen? Because people are focused on same-sex locker rooms and bathrooms and racial this and gender that, and not teaching things that really equip a young person for a decent education and a way to support themselves when they get out of school.
Well, this is what happens when you abandon first principles. Look at our military right now. I mean, you've got a general that says, I'm so proud because we've got the most diverse military. Well, I'll tell you what, you can't go head to head with Putin or President Xi with the most diverse military. I want a military there that knows what a mission's all about, right?
That is exactly right. And then you've got all the gender thing going on, and you have fewer and fewer people enlisting in the military because they
Exactly.
don't want to put up with this nonsense.
Right.
So the military is killing itself. Plus, the budget is basically frozen. Meanwhile, Xi and Putin and others are ramping up their military, and they're going to do bad things.
Yeah, exactly. Because we know that a void can exist. America has proudly been in that place. But look what's happening right now, even in the most recent situations. America's position in the Middle East, just for one, is quite obvious. We're lacking influence there. And without America, then it gives rise to these malcontents and these Arab nations that only want to do harm. I don't see any good that they want to promote.
Well, we have to take them at their word. This is one of the big mistakes we make.
Right.
Margaret Thatcher had a great line some years ago. She said, we in the West make a mistake when we transpose our morality on those who don't share it.
Exactly.
You look how this administration and the Obama administration, which I believe is still running the country, by the way, approached Iran and this Iran nuclear deal. I mean, you have people in Iran, these mullahs, who believe that their God, they call Allah, has commanded them to destroy Israel, to kill all the Jews, and then to come after what they call the cross worshipers, that'd be the Christians, and even moderate Muslims and the non-believers. And now, how do you sit across a table from people who believe their God wants you dead? Exactly. Where is the compromise there? Oh, okay. Instead of bombing you, we'll just shoot you to death. Oh, great. Let's shake hands on that. That's crazy.
Yeah, the only thing you're negotiating is your funeral at that point.
Yeah, there you go. Right. I only have about 5 more minutes here. I've got another interview I got to do. So
right, exactly. Well, we're down to the last 2 here right now with this interview. Cal, again, congratulations on the book. What I've seen over 50 years reporting on America, I know this is going to be such an incredible walk down memory lane for those of us who have lived through these experiences. And it's such a blessing to hear, firsthand from someone like yourself, because it brings it into proper focus, I believe.
Well, thank you, Bill. It begins in 1984 at the start of Ronald Reagan's second term. That's when my column started. And we do a year-by-year thing highlighting, not everything, but some of the things that I felt were important to write about. It's not a column collection, but it's excerpts and commentary. And there's some funny stuff in there, too. So I hope your viewers will get a copy. I like to say on all my books, I have a money-back guarantee. If you do not like it, I guarantee you not to give your money back.
Well, that's honest. Why not? Cal, as we wrap things up, what would you say to tomorrow's journalist? What bit of advice would you give them?
I would say that you should see yourself as serving the public, not just yourself. I would say that the journalism is an honorary profession. Some people have dishonored it, but if you're a young person going into it, read and learn about people who went before, people who you should respect. Read good writers, read different opinions, form your own opinions, but based on facts, not feelings.
Exactly.
And work out the facts and report them accurately. And if there are 2 sides to a story, report the other side, even if it's one you disagree with fairness and accuracy. That's the highest calling of a journalist. And I think that is what the kind of journalism I grew up with. And
exactly.
The kind I continue to try to model for other people.
Well, that is awesome wisdom. And thank you so much for sharing that. I know it comes from your 50 plus years of experience and practical application.
Just tell me I don't look that old, Bill.
You don't. You really don't. Without a doubt. Cal Thomas, thank you so much for being with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You got it. The honor has been ours. Cal Thomas, we thank him for coming on the show. He is, author of the book, A Watchman in the Night, what I've seen over 50 years reporting on America. For more information and be a part of this mighty movement to return to God and to save our country, check it out. BillMartinezShow.com. May God bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Go and be blessed. Thank you so much for being with us. Take care.